From the chilling shower scene in Psycho to the iconic Ghostface in Scream, slasher films have been terrifying audiences for decades. Yet, what exactly is a slasher film? In essence, it's a subgenre of horror, characterized by a violent psychopath stalking and murdering a sequence of victims in a gruesome, often gory manner. These films are known for their suspenseful plots, creative kill scenes, and iconic villains. It was the masters of suspense, like Alfred Hitchcock and Wes Craven, who brought chilling narratives to life, shaping the horror genre as we know it today. They introduced us to the likes of Norman Bates, Michael Myers, and Freddy Krueger, characters who have become synonymous with fear. But how did this all begin? Where did the first drop of blood spill in the cinematic world of slasher films? This thrilling journey began in 1960s with the release of one iconic film. In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho slashed its way into the world, setting the stage for the slasher genre. With Psycho, Hitchcock masterfully crafted an atmosphere of suspense and terror, introducing audiences to the chilling yet captivating world of slasher films. The film's shocking narrative and unexpected twists turned it into an instant classic, laying the groundwork for the genre's future. Psycho's infamous shower scene, with its chilling score and abrupt violence, forever etched itself into the collective consciousness, setting a new standard for on-screen terror. This scene, along with the film's shocking twist ending, revolutionized the horror genre, introducing a new kind of villain, the seemingly ordinary next-door neighbor turned cold-blooded killer. Hitchcock's film was a game-changer, its influence resonating throughout the decades. It inspired a legion of filmmakers to create their own chilling tales of masked killers and unsuspecting victims. Psycho would pave the way for a decade of terror that would forever change the face of horror. The 1970s saw the rise of the slasher film, with chilling tales that would haunt generations. This decade brought forth a wave of raw, visceral horror, as the slasher genre truly began to carve its terrifying niche in the cinematic landscape. This was a time where the genre began to flex its muscles, testing the boundaries of what audiences could handle. Two films, in particular, stand out from this era, each introducing an iconic villain who would go on to become a cornerstone of the genre. The first, Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, released in 1974, introduced us to the chainsaw-wielding Leatherface. This film, inspired by the true crimes of Ed Gein, used its low budget to its advantage, creating an atmosphere of relentless dread that left audiences reeling. Then, in 1978, came John Carpenter's Halloween. This film introduced the world to Michael Myers, a silent, seemingly indestructible killer who would become a fixture in the nightmares of audiences around the globe. Carpenter's film was a masterclass in suspense, using long, unbroken shots and a haunting score to build tension to unbearable levels. These films weren't just about the scares, though. They were also social commentaries, reflecting the fears and anxieties of the time. They introduced audiences to a new kind of villain, one that was not a supernatural creature or a mad scientist, but a human being capable of unimaginable evil. This made them all the more terrifying, as it forced viewers to confront the possibility that such horror could exist in their own world. The impact these films had on the genre was profound. They set the template for what a slasher film could be, establishing conventions that would be followed and subverted by countless films to come. They introduced the concept of the final girl, the lone survivor, who would face off against the killer in the film's climax. They also showed that a slasher film could be more than just a vehicle for gore and violence. It could also be a platform for exploring deeper themes and ideas. As the 70s drew to a close, a new decade awaited, ready to be painted red with the blood of the slasher genre. The 1980s, a decade where the slasher genre truly carved its name into the annals of horror. The 1980s witnessed an explosion of slasher films, each more chilling and gruesome than the last. The genre had found its footing, its audience, and its iconic villains. In the sea of horror, two films stood out, etching their names into the annals of cinematic history: Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street. Friday the 13th, released in 1980, introduced us to the horrifying world of Camp Crystal Lake and its infamous resident, Jason Voorhees. With his hockey mask and machete, Jason became a symbol of relentless terror, a figure that haunted the dreams of moviegoers and left an indelible mark on the slasher genre. The film's success spawned a franchise that stretched over a decade, each installment adding a new layer to the chilling lore of Jason Voorhees. Just 4 years later, in 1984, the world met another iconic villain. A Nightmare on Elm Street brought forth the sinister Freddy Krueger, a character whose very existence blurred the lines between dreams and reality. With his razor-sharp glove, Freddy invaded the dreams of his victims, turning their worst fears into a horrifying reality. This innovative concept proved to be a hit, and Freddy Krueger quickly became another pillar of the genre. But the 80s wasn't just about creating memorable villains, it was about the rise of franchises. The success of Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street paved the way for other slasher films to extend their stories, creating a rich tapestry of horror that spanned multiple films. This era saw the slasher genre evolve from standalone films to interconnected stories, each one building on the last to create an immersive and terrifying universe. The 1980s was a decade of innovation and expansion for the slasher genre. It was a time when filmmakers pushed the boundaries of horror, creating chilling narratives that would stand the test of time. And as the decade drew to a close, the stage was set for the next chapter in the evolution of slasher films. As the 80s faded into memory, the slasher genre was about to be reborn in a way no one expected. So, stay tuned and prepare yourself to dive into the world of horror. Be the first to revisit these iconic tales of terror. Subscribe to our channel and join us on this chilling journey. The 1990s, a decade where the slasher genre was revitalized with a sharp and satirical edge. As we journey into this decade, we find ourselves in a world where the once straightforward slasher formula was flipped on its head, thanks to the innovative film Scream. Released in 1996, Scream breathed new life into the genre by providing a fresh perspective. It was not just a slasher film, it was a film about slasher films. This self-awareness and satirical take on the genre's tropes were a game changer. The audience was introduced to characters who were conscious of the cliches of the horror genre. They knew the rules, often discussing them openly, even as they found themselves in the midst of a real-life horror story. The mastermind behind this revitalization was none other than Wes Craven, a name synonymous with horror. Craven, who had already made waves in the 80s with A Nightmare on Elm Street, was back to redefine the genre once again. With Scream, he merged horror with humor and satire, creating a unique blend that resonated with both critics and audiences. Scream's success was such that it spawned a series of sequels and inspired a slew of other films to adopt a similar self-referential style. It was a mirror held up to the genre, reflecting its evolution while simultaneously pushing its boundaries. Scream not only acknowledged the past of slasher films, but also paved the way for their future, a future where they could be more than just mindless gore and violence. The iconic Ghostface, with its white mask and black cloak, became a symbol of this new era of slasher films. It represented the genre's ability to evolve, adapt, and surprise its audience, proving once again that horror could be smart, engaging, and above all, terrifying. The 90s brought slasher films screaming back into the limelight, setting the stage for the future of the genre. As we continue to explore this evolution, one thing remains clear. The slasher film, much like its relentless killers, is not going anywhere anytime soon. From the 60s to the 90s, slasher films have carved a bloody path through the history of horror. They've sliced and diced their way into our collective consciousness, leaving an indelible mark that continues to influence the genre to this day. The evolution of slasher films is a journey punctuated by fear, suspense, and buckets of blood. It's a tale that begins with the groundbreaking Psycho, which set the stage for what was to come. Alfred Hitchcock's classic not only terrified audiences, but also laid the blueprint for future slasher films, introducing us to the concept of the unhinged killer and the unsuspecting victim. This narrative would be amplified in the 70s, a decade that saw the rise of iconic villains like Leatherface and Michael Myers. These characters, with their terrifying masks and relentless pursuit of their victims, elevated the stakes and solidified the slasher film's place in the horror genre. The 80s, meanwhile, was a golden era for slasher films. It was a time when franchises reigned supreme, and memorable villains like Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger became household names. The decade was characterized by an abundance of gore, creative kill scenes, and a healthy dose of camp. The 90s saw a resurgence of slasher films, with Scream leading the charge. This film revitalized the genre by incorporating elements of satire and self-awareness, offering a fresh take on the well-worn tropes of its predecessors. And the legacy of slasher films is far from over. Recent offerings like Halloween Kills and the reboot of Candyman continue to draw in audiences, proving that our appetite for these blood-soaked thrillers is as strong as ever. Moreover, we can look forward to upcoming projects like the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre film and the Scream sequel, which promise to bring new life to the genre. In the end, the impact of slasher films is undeniable. They've not only shaped the horror genre, but also left an indelible mark on popular culture. Slasher films have left a bloody legacy, one that continues to terrify and entertain audiences across the world. That's a wrap on the evolution of slasher films. Which slasher film is your favorite and why? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and share this video with fellow horror fans.